The Karate Kid. One dirty dish rag triumphs over another, and they both come out clean. All right, today, talking about The Karate Kid. I'm talking about the OG one, released in 1984, starring Ralph Macchio and Elizabeth Shue, Pat Morita, and William Zabka. Written by Robert Mark Kamen and directed by John G. Avildsen. Action, drama, coming of age, underdog, journey of self-discovery type film. I will preface this by saying I love this movie. I've loved it for a long time, since I was a kid, and I will have some spoilers at the very end, but I will let you know before I get there. It's 80s, it's corny, it's quirky, it's angsty, it's realistic, dumb, heart-focused, and feelings. It is feelings. When I was trying to describe this movie to Rebecca, because she's not a huge fan of 80s movies, and we watched this together the other week, I was saying it's a feeler, not a thinker. And I have a soft spot for 80s movies that are like that for a couple of reasons. One, I'm just an 80s kid, so I grew up with a lot of these films in my life as a young child. But let's get to summarizing this thing a little bit here. So we have an underdog teen. He's new to town. He makes good. Somehow, some way, makes good. He's got some conflicts along the way, things he's got to deal with, teenager things, being new in town things, whatever. There's a little bit of classism and racism that are addressed in the movie, not heavy-handed or preachy at all, but they are in there, and it's kind of just a nice flavor. Not flavor. It's nice texture to add on to the reality of the situation, and I'm glad that they get addressed a little bit, but that's not what the movie's about. It's a classic good versus evil, so much so that we've got white guys, we've got good guys dressed in white, and we've got bad guys dressed in black. Very common to do that, but it's a classic good versus evil film. Teen issues. We've got a kid who's learning to find confidence in himself. Again, he's the underdog. He's coming of age. He's on his journey of self-discovery. All those tropes are very valid here. Balance is something that is very key in this movie, and I like that. And I think that's maybe why I focus on balance so much in my life and use that word and think about things in that way, because of this film and watching this since I was a kid. We've got life lessons here, some that have not aged incredibly well, I will say. I think that you could interpret things differently and reframe them, because one, you could say is blind obedience, but you could also just call that trust. It's a story of friendship as well. So, without getting into spoilers, we've got Daniel LaRusso, or Daniel Son, as he's referred to a lot by Pat's character, Mr. Miyagi. And somehow they find their way to each other. And, I think a lot of people already know the story to a degree without knowing the story. So I don't think it's really a spoiler to say that, Daniel gets taken under Mr. Miyagi's wing, teaches him some karate and life lessons along the way. But there's other things that Danny's dealing with that he needs to do on his own, and he's got a guide, he's got a mentor, but he's got to go through the fire alone. Why do I love it so much? I think part of it is just because it was one of the few movies I had as a kid, so I watched it a lot. But I definitely, as I got older, identified with Danny's character, not the whole thing, but with that underdog aspect, being a new kid in town aspect. Also, like being on the lower end of the economic scale. That's a reoccurring theme in my life. Sometimes where he is courting a lady who might be on the other end of the economic scale, and the complications and feelings that come along with that. That classism theme, like I said, is in there, but it's not heavy-handed, and it gets in. I think it's interesting, especially just someone who's coming from my context. So you got basically the kid from the wrong side of the tracks type of deal, and he's trying to just follow his heart, and I think that that's a beautiful thing. I think that especially ever since the reboot, if you want to call it that, with Cobra Kai came out, there's been a lot more question, because I mean we're starring William Zabka and Ralph Macchio again in their original roles, but we're talking about decades later. And I haven't watched the thing myself yet. I plan to eventually, but there's been a lot of question and speculation about let's think about Daniel a little bit more in this in this first original movie here. I mean, it was a trilogy as well. I'm just talking about the first one here, not 2 and 3. I have seen, I think, number 2. I don't know if I've seen 3, and if I've seen number 2 in its entirety, probably was only one time. I'd like to watch the other ones. I don't know if I'll review them at all. Just like Back to the Future, I feel like, man, that first one is iconic. I've seen that a ton of times. 2 and 3, again, I've seen 2 once, I think. 3, bits and pieces here and there. Not as, it's just, the magic kind of struck once, right? It just kind of happened once, and it was beautiful and wonderful. And then after that, kind of became, let's cash in on this, is how I feel about it. And the other ones might be entertaining, but anyway. So, I lost my train of thought completely. Anyway, target audience for this movie. I think if you're into 80s movies at all, I think that this fits right in there. The soundtrack, the style that it's shot in, the way that the lessons are presented, the acting, etc. If you don't mind it being a little corny, because I mean, I think that kind of goes almost hand in hand with 80s movies, those real, like, oh, that's an 80s film. Like, that's one of those defining features, I think, that it gets a little corny. And it definitely has some real good heart. So if you're into just, you need a movie with some heart and some fight in it, then that's cool too. I think it's a good kids movie. I think it does introduce a lot of these things early on in a palatable way without it being too graphic or too complex, but these life lessons of like learning balance in your life. And I guess that's the main one that I think of. I did mention that it is realistic. I mentioned that it's angsty. I mentioned, it's kind of dumb. I think that one of the interesting things here is that one of the things I love about it is that I didn't love at the time, but I have a new appreciation for it now. Before, I watched this movie so many times as a kid and as an adolescent and even as a teenager with a different perspective, obviously, and different lens, but it was very surface level and how I related to it. And watching it as an adult after stepping away from it for I don't know how many years, Daniel is a very flawed protagonist. He is a flawed hero, which makes him more interesting. I don't think they're presenting him that way on purpose to the degree that I would see him as flawed. He's kind of just a wiener sometimes, and it's interesting because I think that they do a good job of something that I can't tell you yet because it's a spoiler. But complex characters are important. And I think that a lot of the time when you've got heroes and villains, the villains have always seemed cooler to me because they seem more complex and they have more of a backstory that's realistic and motivations that make sense. And there's a lot of pain there that gives them a lot of credibility. And with heroes, sometimes they don't do a good job of that. I think here we've got a complex hero. We don't have a complex villain, but things still work out in the end in a way that's very nice that I can't talk about right now. Importance and function, other than the realistic aspect where we've got this, Daniel's no angel. He's kind of a wiener, but he's trying to make good and he's trying to figure out how to do that as a teenager. And I think that it's not a it's a discussion piece. There's things that he does that are good, and there's things that he does that are not so good. And it's something that it's not just like showing a kid like, here's your role model, do everything this kid does. But again, there's topics that come along the way that are points of discussion. Anyway, importance and function beyond that, I think that it is more than just entertainment. I think it shows a great model for some perseverance and trust, and looking inward and applying balance to your life. Daniel is flawed, and that is a good thing about this movie. If you take into consideration that people are all flawed and we're all complex, and that he's not meant to be just like the role model, period. I think that in that aspect, it could be. It was an important movie for me. So, yeah. Where do I put it on my shelf? I put it high on my shelf. It is not quite top shelf, but it's close. And it's one of those ones that I've been thinking about. It's just such a classic for me. It's something I grew up with. It's something that I'm seeing with more mature eyes right now. And it's still, I mean, it has some flaws, which we'll talk about in the spoiler bit here, but it's high on my shelf, for sure. There's a lot of nostalgia there for me. The message, it's very palatable again. It has just... my love for the 80s is partly due to this film. It's good. I think you should see it. I think that it doesn't really have a lot in there that can turn people off. I think that there's a few things that maybe, depending on your age of the kids, they might not even understand at all and won't be an issue. And if they ask you about it, it's not anything weird. I guess there's a drug reference, except it never gets called out. They'll just throw it on there. There's a drug reference that you see visually, and but you don't know. If you didn't know what it was, you wouldn't know what it was, right? And it's very subtle. And it just brings a lot of feelings out for me because of the identity or the attachment to the character, because I identify with the character have for so long, and it's interesting to reflect on that. But it's entertaining too, and it's a softer, if you want to call it a soft action, the way Top Gun was kind of like this action romance, and this is kind of like that, but again, very soft in the action. There is some fighting, there is a tiny bit of blood, there's karate stuff going on, some of it's kind of cool, but yeah, it's one that is a feeler, not a thinker, not too much anyway. Spoilers, magical spoiler alert happening here. So I'm just going to talk about the ending. We've got Daniel, there's conflicts, whatever, he's running into Johnny here and again because this love triangle thing that's going on. And that's the thing. Daniel finds this young lady that he fancies, and he pursues a relationship with her. Her ex, which is Johnny, does not like that. And then they get into altercations and things. And I mentioned Danny's flawed, and there's things that he does. I keep calling him Danny. He's never called Danny in the freaking movie. Daniel is flawed, and he at times eggs these guys on when he really shouldn't, because it's really dumb to do that. And he does so at times when it's just he's being kind of a jerk. But here's the thing that's just part of his flaw, right? But here's the thing, towards the end, so we've got this weird little bit of magic that happens twice in the movie where Mr. Miyagi heals Daniel by this is intense music, and then Mr. Miyagi just and then he does something to Daniel's shoulder one time, and then all of a sudden magically his shoulder's not sore anymore and he can move it. And then later, what happens? We're getting to the final of the tournament. It's the last couple minutes of the movie here, and the bad guys cheat. Cobra Kai cheats to try to get Daniel out of there rather than trying to beat him fair and square. They don't want to take that chance, so they're instructed to cheat and take him out. And there's an illegal move, and they injure his leg, and he can't stand on it. He can't put weight on it. He can't fight. and he got to like the very last round, and therefore Johnny wins by default. And while he's in the back there, and Mr. Miyagi's like, "Yeah, I'm proud of you. You did good. Like, you did a good fight." But Daniel can't let it go. And to me, this kind of reminds me of Grease. So spoiler alert for Grease. But like, Grease is basically just says like, "Hey, why don't you just change yourself, and that's how you get the guy. Just be a completely different person in the end, and then everything will be great." Which is not a good message. It's a fun movie, and I really like it, but that's not fun. That's not a good message for anyone. But here in the end, Daniel can't let go. He wants to go back in, and he wants to win. And there's a difference between wanting to win and wanting to do your best and try. But like, he's so injured, he can't walk. The doctors say like, "Yeah, you did well, son. Like, whatever. Like, peace to you, friend. You did great. Try again next year. The other guys cheated. That sucks." But then Daniel like begs Mr. Miyagi to do the magic to his leg, and then he's like, "Why? You already proved what you needed to prove. You proved that you've earned their respect, right?" And I think he did. He really did earn the respect of those in Cobra Kai, other than the sensei, who's a wiener. The other dudes, I think that some of them Daniel can fight, and he proved to us that he can beat us and whatever. But that's not good enough for Daniel. And he's like, "No, I need to." He says he'll never have balance this way. Not with him, not with them, not with Ali. And I just think that's silly. I think that sometimes there's nothing you can do. Because what if you go back out there and then you lost? You know what I mean? Like, so Mr. Miyagi gives in, which I just don't think he would normally do. I don't think that speech that Danny gives is very convincing of like, "I'll never have balance." And it's like, yeah, I think you will. I think you'll be okay. So anyway, he does it. He goes out there and then he wins. And then that's the end. Here's the thing that is very redeeming, because that little blip there is what I don't like. It's not very consistent with Mr. Miyagi's character, I believe. And also, that doesn't, like, I feel like they just could have left it there and the message would have been sent properly without him needing to actually go in there and win. I think that he earned the respect. And anyway, so I mentioned that they do a good job of making Danny a little more complex and flawed, but Johnny, not so much. We don't get a lot of depth from him or anybody in Cobra Kai. However, we do see growth. Because at the very end, when he wins, when Daniel wins, Johnny goes and grabs the trophy and he gives it to Daniel. And he says, "You're all right, LaRusso," I think is the quote. And he is changed. He respects him. He admires that perseverance and that drive and that ability and that spirit that Daniel has. So I like that. I think that it's a good part of this film. And I think that it might have foreshadowing into what Cobra Kai becomes as the show, of this question of like, who's really the villain here? Who's really, let's flip things around a bit. Let's change our perspective and let's look at things deeper. Anyway, I love the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, I think it's a classic. I think you should watch it. If you don't like 80s movies, then sucks for you. Rebecca watched it. She enjoyed it more than she thought she would. So there you go. Anyway, it's cute. It's fun. It's a good time. It's got a lot of heart. And Karate Kid.